Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health?
Hello, everyone. We're here today celebrating the third anniversary of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities. My name is Vinicius. I'll be the host today, interviewing Dr. Adriana Popescu. She is a clinical psychologist, addiction and trauma specialist, author, speaker, podcast host, empowerment coach who's based in San Francisco, California, and practices worldwide. She's the clinical director at Every Lane, a women's addiction treatment program focusing on occurring mental health disorders and trauma, and founder and CEO of Firebird Healing, an innovative holistic trauma healing center, both in Northern California. Hello, Dr. Adriana.
Hi, Vinny. Happy to be with you here today.
I want to start today's episode with the first question about your newest book. What if you're not as fucked up as you think you are? So, what's inspired you to write that book? Can you let us know a bit more about that?
Yeah, and the title, the controversial title, we did put asterisks in there in the printed version. But yeah, it's a long story of how I got to this book, but really the bottom line is during the pandemic, I finally, for years people have been like, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? And those of us that have written dissertations have already written a book, and we didn't always like that process. So writing was not something I really was joyful about doing. But for a long time, I didn't feel like I had anything to say. And then something happened during the pandemic that I finally realized, oh, actually, I have a lot to say. And it really is what I have learned from my own experiences, as well as the thousands of clients that I've worked with over the years, which is what I've discovered is there's this lowest common denominator that seems to be at the root of every limitation, every problem, every issue that people seem to come to me with, whether it's really severe trauma, PTSD, addiction, or my coaching clients who maybe are struggling with a business or their career or a relationship or something like that. What I would always see across all these different people is that there seemed to be limiting beliefs that were at the root of whatever the person was experiencing that was making it so that they couldn't actually change whatever it is they were saying they wanted to change. And this is the idea that we have core false beliefs that we are carrying around, kind of like the programs in a computer. They're what makes the computer, you and I are on a computer right now talking, and behind the scenes, all these software programs and hardware programs that make everything work. And we're not consciously aware of them, but they have to be working for us to be able to do what we're doing. And so what happens is we as people also develop these programs, these belief systems from the time we're babies in the womb. And we come into the world and we're bombarded constantly with these messages about how we're supposed to look, how we're supposed to act, who we're supposed to be, what we're not supposed to be. And what starts to happen is we get programmed. Children, up until the age of 7, are in a highly hypnotizable state. Dr. Bruce Lipton writes about this in The Biology of Belief, and I talk about it in the book as well. They'll look at children's brain waves up until the age of 7. Their brainwaves are primarily in the theta wavelength, which means like deep meditation or hypnosis. You're essentially being super absorbent of all the material that's coming in and taking it to be true, which is why you can tell a kid that there's this bunny that's going to come every Easter and give you candy and chocolates and things, right? And children will believe it. Even though it doesn't make logical sense, it's not true, they believe what is told to them. And so we will believe what our authority figures, our parents, families, older kids, teachers at school, priests or pastors, whoever the influences are. And nowadays, media, television, movies, social media, we're constantly getting bombarded with these messages, and it starts to shape the way we see ourselves. We learn how to judge ourselves. We learn how to make ourselves wrong, because we're desperately trying to fit in. And sometimes the messages we get is it's not okay to be different, or you're too much, or you're not enough, or whatever it may be. And then we start to believe these lies to be true. So
The lies. Yeah.
yeah, that's really what was the inspiration, is recognizing this pattern across so many different people, and knowing that in my personal experience and in my professional experience, I've been able to discover tools that allow us to change those programs and those limiting points of view. So I wanted to get that information out there in the world so people knew that we have the technology to change whatever it is in our lives that isn't working.
Can you please tell us more about those tools that are like able to change the lies that we believe with all this information that's being bombarded to us?
Yeah.
And tell of course to the readers like what they will get out of using those tools and the book.
Yeah. So really the book, it takes like a perspective across many different modalities around how these core limiting beliefs get created, and how what
Mhm.
tools we can use to change them. So I start with traditional psychology, and I explain cognitive behavioral therapy and how we can use something like a thought record to challenge the automatic thoughts, the thought distortions, to change the basically those limiting beliefs, and look at like what evidence we have that supports them and what evidence we have that does not, and reframe the way that we're seeing things. That's traditional psychotherapy. CBT is considered a gold standard in Western traditional psychotherapy. And I go from there and I move into energy psychology, and I talk about how energy psychology was born, and how we can use tools like EFT tapping, or a tool called Be Set Free Fast,
Mhm.
neuro emotional technique, how these different modalities are working with the energy systems in our bodies, because really our thoughts, our emotions, even the physical sensations in our body, they're all energy. And energy is malleable, it can change, it can be molded, it can be shifted. And so it's taking the same premise, but then working with these tools to change the energy around it, and to also work with things like trauma, because trauma has a big impact on how we see ourselves in the world, how we can do things like rewire our nervous systems, get out of a stuck fight, flight, or freeze response, and change the beliefs that came out of traumatic experiences. And to really do that work, you have to be more somatic and mind body based, because talk therapy alone hasn't been shown to be, super effective in just talking about your trauma over and over again. You have to actually get to the energies that are held in the body and held deep in the brain, in our subconscious mind, to really be able to heal from that. And from there, I move into access consciousness, which is this work that I've done more in the last 10, 12 years, which is really about, seeing things from a completely different perspective, talking about how your point of view creates your reality, and then giving you tools from access that you can use to start to access your infinite being, because fundamentally at the
Mhm.
core, your essence, your spirit, you're a whole and perfect being, you're an infinite being. You're not broken, you're not defective. These are all things we learned. You're not born inherently wrong, bad, broken, defective, right? So reconnecting with your essential self, your infinite being, and tools you can use to do that. So I really am looking
Yeah.
at this issue through a lot of different lenses, hoping that the readers will get a sense for how all of this happens for us, because so much of it is below our conscious awareness, and giving them a variety of tools they can try, because I give exercises at the end of each chapter. It's kind of a book and workbook combined, how people can then go about changing these distorted ways in which they're seeing themselves, and stop believing the lies that they think are true about
Yeah.
themselves.
So they can really expect transformation, let's say, or at least a bit of change in their world from the tools that you like give them during the book.
Yeah, if they're willing to do the work, does take work. It's not just going to magically, happen. You do have to do some things, but yeah, if people, these tools are so powerful. I love them because they're so empowering. Because when you use these tools over time, you start to realize I can change the way I think. I can change the way I feel. I can even
Mhm.
change what's going on in my body. I mean, the listeners and viewers of this show probably have heard me talk about, this almost 20-year battle I had with Lyme disease.
Yeah,
That was
I was about to ask you about this.
Yeah, that was supposedly an incurable condition that was, I'm going to be stuck with it for the rest of my life if I even live that long, because Lyme disease can kill you. And if I had
Mhm.
believed what the doctors told me, I wouldn't be here right now. So, your point of view really does create your reality. And I always knew somewhere inside that there's got to be a way I can get better from this. There's got to be a way I can heal. And if I'm not finding it here in Western medicine, I'm going to look elsewhere. I'm going to look in traditional healing methods. I'm going to look at holistic and alternative healing methods. And I did. And that's how I came to discover all these tools. It was really through my own personal journey, which in many ways became a spiritual journey, and through a very dark night of the soul, as we talk about in kind of spiritual practices. I did go through that. I was extremely depressed. I was extremely sick. Um, and I was down a dark black hole. But the fact that I discovered these techniques, and as I started using them and went to different practitioners and they were working in this more holistic way with me, I started feeling better. And so then I wanted to learn how to do these techniques so I could help my clients. And really, that's how it all evolved over the last 20 plus years.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like you literally had skin in the game, let's say like this, with all the tools that you're sharing in the book, like practicing and using them yourself to share with your readers. And I find that amazing.
Thank you.
And still on the book, like what are the feedback that you've been receiving from people that are reading it? What are they thinking about it? Like have you received any review?
Yeah, people have been really positive. We have some reviews on Amazon, and we're asking people to please do more, because the more reviews it has, the more Amazon puts it out there for people to find, all the algorithms. But I actually had a professional review, an editorial review from a book editor, um, who reviewed my book for the energy psychology newsletter. So there's an association for comprehensive energy psychology that I'm affiliated with. And I'm going to be speaking at their conference in a few weeks on EFT for addiction. That's going to be my second book. But I had a professional editor read the book and had really great things to say about it. I think we even put the review, there's an abbreviated version on Amazon, and I think we have the full version somewhere, maybe on the landing page for the book, whatifyou'renot.com. But she really wrote a great, and she doesn't know me. She doesn't know, she knows a little bit about energy psychology, but she thought I did a really great job of explaining these concepts to the reader. Somebody told me that my explanation of how to do EFT was like the best one they had ever read. Mostly the people who have given me feedback have said really positive things. They found the information really useful. They found it easy to understand. One of the worries I had, in writing it was, did I put too much in here? Is it too much information? Is it going to go over people's heads? But it seems like people are getting it. It seems like they're finding it helpful. It's really opening them up to a different possibility, which was one of the main things I wanted to do, is just to maybe plant a seed. Even if people don't choose not to do
Hmm.
this work, if it's just plant a seed for a different possibility that, hey, maybe you're really just not as effed up as you think you are, that in and of itself, if that title sparks something in someone's world, great. But yeah, so far so good. I've been very pleased with the feedback that we've gotten, and I would just love the book to go out in the world and reach more people.
That's incredible. And I wanted to ask you one more thing on the book. How it was like being interviewed by Jack Canfield about the book.
I love Jack. He's so great. He's really someone I consider like an inspiration or even a mentor. And I was so grateful. I've taken some of his workshops. I got a chance to be interviewed by him at his beautiful home in Santa Barbara, California, and during the pandemic, which was amazing that he was still allowing that to occur. And he's just such a lovely man. And, he came from nothing. He too, he could have easily taken a victim consciousness and stayed stuck in poverty and in limited, possibilities for his life. But he too was like a warrior, and he knew something greater was possible. He worked his tail off. He got himself into an Ivy League school. Our stories are actually kind of similar, even starting in West Virginia. We both actually were born, and I was partly raised in West Virginia as he was, and we both went to Ivy League schools. And kind of made something. I haven't reached the success he's had. Oh my gosh, he's sold like 500 million copies of those Chicken Soup for the Soul books. It's incredible. But it was lovely. I mean, he's a big fan of tapping. He actually has spoken on the Tapping World Summit a number of times. He's kind of an expert in EFT tapping. He's very open to energy psychology and the different approaches. So he knew what I was talking about, which is always really nice
Mhm.
to be interviewed by someone who knows what you do and what it is, and can
Yeah.
ask you really, I think, and he asked really good questions, really intelligent questions. And I just felt really comfortable with him, even though there's cameras everywhere and it's, a pretty well set up professional studio that he has in his house. I felt really, he was so warm and friendly and open, and it was just, I felt really warmly received by him. So yeah, it was a real treat.
Yeah, that's awesome. And to wrap up the book, so we can move on into therapy and Firebird healing, I'd like to ask you, like, what is one tool that you could share with anyone that's listening to this right now on the book that would contribute to them? Is there one that you're like preferred one or something like that?
Well, I think some of them require probably more time, to really get into. Like to teach someone how to tap, you kind of have to go through some explanation of it. So
Yeah.
I guess I might pick something from one of the first chapters in the book, which is Byron Katie's work. If you're familiar with her, you can find her at thework.com. And she has these four really super simple questions that can help you to shift the way you're thinking about yourself or a situation. And it's basically like a layperson's version of, cognitive behavioral therapy. But I find it super simple, and I offer it up as one of the exercises in the book, which is you take something negative. Like, let's say you're looking at a job interview that maybe didn't go so well, and you're thinking, I blew it. I failed. See, I'm a total failure. I blew that interview. Okay. And so you would take that thought and then apply these four questions to it, because questions will empower. Questions open up different perspectives and possibilities. Answers tend to give you tunnel vision. And that's what most of us are doing when we're seeing ourselves through these core false beliefs. I'm a failure. I'm a loser. I never get it right. You can't see past that. These questions help you to look at it from a different perspective. So you ask first, is it true? Is it true that I'm a failure? Is it really true? How do I know it's true? Right. So, that would force you to look at, okay, have I failed at every single thing in life? Well, no. Like I managed to successfully get a degree, or I've managed to, maintain a relationship before. I've gotten jobs before, so you start to look at, okay, maybe it's not totally true. Maybe sometimes I have failed at some things, but maybe not all the time. How does it feel when I think this way? Well, I feel pretty crappy. I feel shame. I feel sad. I feel hopeless. If I think that I'm a failure, it makes me want to give up. If I'm somebody who uses substances, maybe it makes me want to drink or use, right? Um, that's another question. And then what's another way to look at it? You make a turnaround. What's a different way to look at it? Okay, so maybe I reframe this thought to, yes, I may have not succeeded at some things, but I have actually been really successful with others. I'm not a
Mhm.
total failure. And I can learn how to get better at interviewing. Maybe I could take a workshop, or I could get some coaching lessons on how I might present myself differently in an interview. I can change this. Even though this didn't work out for me, I can change it. I can get more skilled, and I can get practice and get better at interviewing. And so that would
Mhm.
be the turnaround. That's a really simple tool. The work, Byron Katie, it's really easy, and anybody could use those questions to just start to consider a different possibility.
Yeah, it's basically about like having the curiosity to ask those questions and explore like what's really going on, and like being open to receive new possibilities, experiences, information about it.
Yep.
Because sometimes, for myself, for example, I forget the success I had in the past. So when I'm failing at something, I'm like, Jesus, this didn't work, and I make that really big, really big, really big, instead of looking like to other things, other like stepping stones that I did in the past that helped me get there.
Yes.
I found that amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
And you recently founded a trauma healing center, Firebird Healing.
Mhm.
Like, would you tell us a little bit more about it? What inspired you to create it?
Well, what I saw was the need. So, I also am the clinical director at Avery Lane, which is a women's dual diagnosis program here in the Bay Area. And our women were coming in, primarily for substance abuse. That's their primary thing. But then they also have these co occurring mental disorders, particularly trauma and PTSD. And though we do a lot with them in the 30 or 60 days, sometimes less, sometimes more, that we have with them, we still weren't able to get really, and we could do some trauma processing work, but there's so many of them have chronic PTSD, lifetimes worth of trauma to work through. And
Hmm.
there wasn't the time and an ability to do that. So I saw where there was a real need for that kind of treatment for people, especially who have gone through rehab. And so originally it was conceived as an intensive outpatient program. I had designed a whole curriculum to have people come 3 times a week and do this, learn about trauma, learn about the stages of healing trauma, and tools that they can use to manage, trauma responses, like when we get triggered to a fight, flight, freeze response, and to be able to do some of the deeper processing with brain spotting or EMDR or somatic experiencing, all these wonderful modalities that I talk about in the book that are really effective at getting to the trauma that we've locked in our bodies, locked in our minds, and to be able to release that so that people can get to a space of post traumatic growth. Because that was always
Hmm.
vision for me with trauma work, is that I want to help people be like the phoenix bird. That's why I chose the name Firebird Healing and the symbol of a phoenix
Yes.
bird, which comes from mythology. I believe it's Greek mythology, Roman mythology, whatever it is. And the phoenix bird rises. It has flames for wings because it rises from the fires of destruction and ruin, and it triumphs. And so Firebird Healing, triumph over trauma, that became the MO. And this program was designed to help people learn how to heal from trauma. So then the pandemic hit and everything went online, and Firebird kind of went on hold for a while. And then I decided that I needed to launch it in whatever format I could, forget IOP for now, and let's just get out there. Let's give people information. I
Hmm.
the Firebird website, Firebird Healing, firebird-healing.com. I want it to be a venue where people go and get information, where they can read articles and find resources and watch videos, on all our social media and YouTube and stuff, where they can watch and learn about trauma and techniques and people's stories and how they can heal from this stuff. And then we started doing online workshops, and we just had our first in-person workshop just last weekend. And then I hired another therapist, Nicole, to start working with me. And so through Firebird, we offer individual and group therapy. We offer workshops. We're creating some healing retreats for next year, and all kinds of really, really great stuff. Like, my vision for Firebird is for it to be like the premier trauma healing resource, where people can go and find hope and find tools and resources that are going to help them come out of that black hole of trauma and despair and recognize that they can be like that phoenix bird rising from the ashes and truly triumph over their trauma.
That's incredible. So with Firebird, it's all about trauma and triumphing over it. So healing from trauma is possible. Because like I see a lot of people like talking about trauma and looking at through lens of like this is not like possible for me to get over. Could you please like enlighten us more about that and also talk about the difference between a big trauma and a smaller trauma? Like how does all that work?
Yeah. So trauma basically is an experience that you have that overwhelms in the moment, overwhelms your ability to cope. And people have been talking about like big T. Most people think of trauma as what some would call big T, capital T trauma. So things like war, acts of violence, natural disasters, assault, abuse of physical, mental, emotional, sexual. People think of that kind of stuff as being big T trauma. And little t trauma has been often overlooked, but can be equally overwhelming to people, which can include things like losing, loss, grief, loss, losing a job that you love, losing a partner, losing your pet, being bullied or harassed, having an illness of some sort, right? Maybe not a life threatening illness, but like me with the, well, Lyme, we could have considered life threatening at some point, but whatever it is, these kinds of experiences that sometimes don't get living as a, let's say, having a sexual identity or gender identity that doesn't conform to your family or your neighborhood or what, or your part of the world you live in, and then you have to either keep it secret, or you face harassment and discrimination or whatever. All of those things can contribute to someone being overwhelmed in their ability to cope with that. And there's a whole biochemical thing that happens with like the fight, flight, freeze response in our brains and our amygdalas, and all these things happen to our bodies, our minds, our emotions, and to our spirit as a result of having trauma. And more recently, I've actually really warmed up to a different language for big T, little t trauma, which is covert trauma and overt trauma. So overt trauma being more of those big T, what seems like obviously a traumatic thing that would probably, feel traumatizing to most people. And then covert trauma, those little t traumas that we might overlook and think, oh, well, that wasn't a big deal, just get over it, right? Like you mentioned this point of view that people have, well, it was in the past, you can't change it, just get over it and move on. Except we can't. I devote a whole chapter to the book on trauma and the impact that it has on us in all those areas, because it can, especially recurring traumatic or adverse experiences, especially in childhood when your brain is still forming, can totally change the way your brain develops. Your brain, the amygdala, will misfire, over time. It'll keep thinking you're in a life or death situation when you're not. And so you're seeing lions, tigers, and bears and threats everywhere where there are none. And so people are stuck in this chronic state of hypervigilance and fight flight, or they're shut down and they go into dissociation or freeze where they're not even present with their bodies and like really, out of it in some kind of way, all the way to the extremes of, complete dissociation and losing time and dissociative amnesia and all these things. And so people are not recognizing the effect that trauma has on our bodies. It changes the way you see yourself. It changes how safe you feel in the world. Trauma is very physiological as well as psychological. It affects the way your beliefs, core false beliefs, will come out of trauma. Oftentimes things like, I'm broken, I'm damaged goods, nobody's going to want to be with me because this has happened to me, or some sort of victim consciousness, like I have no control over what happens to me. Bad things always happen to me and I can't stop them, things like that. Or maybe I deserved it. I'm fundamentally, there's something wrong with me. I'm a bad person and I must have deserved to have this thing happen to me. So it affects how we think, how we feel. It can even crush our spirit in some way. We can feel very disconnected from that part of ourselves, our infinite being selves, that is whole and perfect. We can start to feel not that. We can feel gross and yuck and shame, and there's something fundamentally like wrong with me. And if you're not addressing all those aspects of trauma, people typically don't heal from it, especially if they have had repetitive experiences over and over again
Mhm.
that have basically solidified these beliefs into existence.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I find that type of topic incredible. Thank you very much for sharing a bit of your knowledge on trauma. And I'd like to address like on Firebird, we're dealing with trauma, and in your book you talk about like energy psychology and holistic approaches. Do you apply those holistic approaches on Firebird as well?
Yeah.
Like how do you integrate all that, all your practices? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, at Firebird as well as in my practice, we incorporate the best of the traditional modalities and the best of the holistic modalities. And I'm constantly ever the student, always learning about new things. Brain spotting is not something I'd even heard of until a few years ago when I heard David Grand speak at an energy psychology conference. I took a day-long workshop with him and I thought, my gosh, this stuff is amazing. It came from EMDR, which is a tried and true trauma treatment for many, many years. and he just developed it to be less abreactive. That's one of the main complaints people have with EMDR is sometimes people get overwhelmed with the material, the trauma material that comes up. I find brain spotting to be less of that. The energy psychology tools we use, Nicole and I are both trained in brain spotting and energy psychology. She's really loving the tools, and she's even taken an access bars class and knows how to run bars on people. So we do in-person work at my office in San Francisco. We do online work. We do therapy. We do coaching. There's so many different things that we offer. And yeah, we use a lot of these holistic tools because we found that they're a lot more effective than just the traditional talk therapy. The joke I often say is the talk therapy is kind of like a dog chasing its tail. Sometimes it's not getting to what we need. And now that we understand the science of trauma, polyvagal theory has really opened up a lot of understanding around how trauma is physiological and not just psychological. So when you're treating it, you have to be also addressing the body and all the ways in which, that trauma is stored in the body. Energy psychology is a cognitive somatic practice. It's mind-body medicine. And you have a lot of other modalities out there that are as well. So the technology is there. Science is now validating these modalities. There's a huge body of research. If you go to the ASAP website, energypsych.org, there's something like over 300 published research studies now on these techniques and how they are shown to be highly effective with all kinds of issues: depression, anxiety, trauma, PTSD, addiction, phobias, all kinds of like mental health issues, physical things like chronic pain, allergies, health issues of various kinds. And EP is really taken off in sports psychology. So you have a lot of people who are professional athletes who are using tapping. I've worked with a couple of Olympic athletes to help them, deal with performance anxiety, to be able to concentrate, to be able to do their very best, to be their very best. David Grand uses brain spotting with actors and other kinds of performers. So many people have, stage fright, or, they get nervous when they're in front of a camera. We help people with that, with public speaking, all kinds of things. So the applications are endless. These tools are so incredibly powerful. They really can allow you to change really anything in your life that is not working.
So you could say that energy psychology is not really different, but there is a difference between energy psychology and the traditional psychology. Could you speak just a little bit more about that? Because I'm aware that you just spoke some differences between the two right now.
I think that energy psychology is more integrative and comprehensive. I think traditional psychotherapy comes a little bit from the Western medicine model, which is about symptoms and symptom management, right? This is how even the whole insurance system in America is based. You have to meet medical necessity for a mental health disorder, and then all of the therapy is supposed to be oriented toward mitigating the symptoms of that disorder. Much like a diabetic goes to the doctor, gets put on insulin to manage the symptoms of their diabetes so they don't get into a diabetic coma or whatever, right? That's the kind of conventional model. And energy psychology to me goes deeper. It gets to the root causes of why this is an issue in the first place. It also addresses, like I said, the mind, the body, and the spirit, and the emotions, right? So you're looking at all those different aspects and how they've been impacted, whether it's by a trauma, or what are the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual components of depression or of trauma or of addiction, right? So I think we're being more comprehensive, and the other thing you see in Western medicine is you go to your general practitioner for one thing, and then you have to go to a specialist, right? The body is even seen in different systems. Like you go to this kind of doctor for your eyes, and you go to that kind of doctor for your foot, and you go to this kind of doctor for your heart. It's fragmented. And so I think we're being more complete when we're addressing all these different components, and we can do it in one venue rather than having to send someone to 5 different practitioners to address 5 different aspects of the same thing. Medicine is coming along. I think mental health is also coming along. I think we are seeing movements toward more integrated medicine, more functional medicine that's looking at how all the systems interact with each other. And, even on the podcast, we interviewed doctors Juliette Morgan And more recently, we had an interview with someone who was talking about this more integrated approach to long illness. She was working a lot with long COVID and things like that. And so I do think medicine is starting to come along, and we have a long ways to go. But for now, obviously, I'm a little biased towards, these more holistic approaches, but have found them to be effective, and the research is backing us up. What they'll find when they compare EP, energy psychology, for instance, with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, both get good results, but EP does it in half the time. So if you can find, a method that gives people long lasting or even permanent results in changing something, and they can do it in half the time and with half the cost, that's going to be pretty interesting to insurance companies,
Yeah.
to people who don't want to be in therapy for years on end. I mean, I once had a client come to me and was told by a psychoanalyst, psychoanalysis has been around for many, many, many years. And it's all about how, you're going to have to come to therapy 3 to 5 times a week for years on end to see change. And we know that that's not required. And we know that's not, that it can be done much faster than that, and much more completely than that. And that's what these energy techniques allow us to do.
So there's a lot around it about mental health and trends as well. So what are the trends that you're seeing right now in mental health?
What I'm really encouraged about, actually, with the current state of mental health treatment is that we are getting some new stuff coming in. There's this huge resurgence with the psychedelic assisted therapies, ketamine, psilocybin. The MDMA study is getting amazing results about treating PTSD and trauma with MDMA in these supervised, therapy sessions. We're learning more about ayahuasca and ibogaine and all these other medicines, plant medicines that have been used for millennia by traditional cultures and cultures all around the world. There's a huge amount of research and enthusiasm around those. I'm encouraged by that. We have some really interesting brain-based treatments like transmagnetic stimulation, where you're using magnetic frequencies on the brain to help with treatment-resistant depression. You have things like biofeedback and neurofeedback that are changing brain waves. We have our energy psychology tools that are becoming more and more mainstream.
Mhm.
We even have an interesting new treatment that we're exploring at the rehab center, at potentially offering, called a stellate ganglion block, which involves injecting an anesthetic into the neck, into this bundle of nerves that helps the vagus nerve to reset, so that people who have had trauma and are living in that amped up fight or flight or shut down freeze state, it helps reset that mechanism for them. That's very promising and interesting. I just am really encouraged by how much new information is coming out, new research, new technology, and also a revisiting of the old traditional classic methods. And when we're training mental health practitioners and training MDs, bringing in the wisdom of traditional practices like acupuncture, like shamanic healing, like whatever has been used, Ayurvedic medicine, working with the chakras, working with meridians,
Yeah.
doing Tai Chi, Qigong, and yoga, and meditation, and all the things. And now science is catching up and telling us that all of these things are effective. They are creating changes in the brain and the nervous system and the body, and our genetics. Epigenetics is this fascinating new field that can show us how trauma changes the way our genes function, and how things like energy psychology can undo some of that damage, and also change the way our genes function. So I'm really encouraged by where we're at. And what I'm hoping for the future of mental health is that we continue down this path of more inclusivity, not exclusivity. I'd love to see more mental health practitioners learning about these more holistic approaches, and not just relying on one tool, for every client, because it doesn't work. I have a giant toolbox, and sometimes I am using the more traditional approaches with folks because that's where they're at and that's what they're open to. But I love the idea of having bigger toolboxes and having other mental health professionals have bigger toolboxes, so that we really can serve our clients with the best technology and techniques that we possibly can, the ones that really do work and will create lasting change, too many of my clients have come to me and said, I was in therapy before and I would walk. We would just talk the whole time. The therapist would nod and say, and not much was done. And they would walk out of the session feeling worse than when they came in. I don't want that for my clients. I want clients to come to therapy or coaching and walk out or get off of Zoom and feel better than they did when they came in. And I know that these tools and techniques allow us to do that. So I'm on a mission right now to get the word out that we have the technology, we have a variety of different approaches, and you can, in fact, change the way you see things. You can change what's not working for you, and you might come to find that you are, in fact, not as effed up as you think that you are.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Adriana. It was a delight doing this interview with you. And we did this switched mode today to celebrate the third anniversary of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities. Yes. Would you like to address a bit about it?
Yes, I'm episode 75. I wanted to be episode 75 to celebrate. Yes, May is the month when we launched the podcast back in 2020, right in the midst of the pandemic. And I'm so grateful for all of the amazing guests that I've had on the podcast over the years. I've had some incredible visionaries and healers and some of the creators of some of these methods and the people that are out there that have done all the hard work to try to get these tools into more mainstream and have done the research and are still doing the research. They're my mentors. They're my inspiration. They have incredible stories of their own. So many of them, like myself, share a personal story of struggle, of illness, of trauma, and of using these approaches to triumph over that trauma. So it's been a real joy to do this podcast. And I have so many more shows lined up and really cool people that are going to come on the show. I feel very blessed to be able to do this. It's really fun for me to talk with folks about their stories and their tools and what they have found works and doesn't work. And I love that there are other people out there that are thinking outside the box. I got an email not too long ago from a woman, a therapist somewhere in the Midwest, maybe where people aren't quite as open to this kind of thing, and how inspired she felt by my podcast to know that there are other healing professionals out there who are using these tools and she's not alone, and that we're out there, and she felt really inspired and hopeful about pursuing this kind of approach with her clients, knowing that there were other people out there doing this work. So that was really, moving to me. And I know how much the audience has also, in their comments and feedback, has let me know that the information I'm providing is valuable, and they also feel hope and inspiration and feel like they have a direction to go. We offer so many resources. Just in our show notes, we give a lot of links and resources for folks. So I'm just really proud of the work that we've done. And I'm super grateful to you, Vinny, being my behind the scenes guy who puts it all together and handles all the technology that's over my head. So grateful to my team, grateful to all of the audience, those of you that tune in, always, asking if you like this stuff, please do subscribe, comment, share, help us get this information out there in the hands of more people. And of course, if you want to find me, you can find me on all the different social media or at my two websites, adrianapopescu.org or firebird-healing.com.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adriana. It was amazing, this conversation. Thank you so much for creating and leading all this movement. I love it. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.